Hello there, my name is Ruby and I am the host of this video that will be focusing on China and their views and standpoint on the issue of climate change. But first, a few introductory pieces of information. According to Greenpeace, climate change is caused by the buildup of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. These gases trap heat within the atmosphere, raising the average temperature of the planet. This, in turn, affects our oceans and climate with devastating impacts on people and environments. China has approximately 1.38 billion people and has an area of 9,600,000 square kilometers. It accounts for 18.47% of the world's population and its main language is Mandarin. Its GDP stands at 11.4 trillion and GDP per capita, PPP, is 15.4k. The Communist Party of China runs China's political system, and China's recent gastronomic growth has created a necessity for more electricity, which is mainly powered by coal. Because of this, there has been a growth in the carbon dioxide emissions that has left China with quite a problem to solve, reversing the climate change.
Hi, I'm Tom Convoy, and I am here to talk to you about climate politics in China. Chinese politics on climate change can be analysed in terms of internal politics and international politics. First, to internal politics. In China, the economic is the political. China's epic industrial growth has supported the growth of the middle class. China's growing prosperous population needs high growth or the government could go into crisis and be overthrown. There is a strong argument that China has in fact been losing growth to environmental degradation. The real cost of climate change is estimated to be 8 to 15% of GDP annually, according to Midas source. For one example, China is losing farmland to pollution as it increasingly had to import its food. They must feed 22% of the world's population on only 9% of its arable land. To counter this, China desires to improve technology and efficiency to support growth and reduce their environmental footprint. A huge problem in China is that environmental policy is centralized, while growth targets are decentralized. This causes provincial and local governments to avoid climate policies that will reduce growth. There are growing concerns about droughts and worsening water resources, with some rivers having very little flow, which is often also contaminated. Floods are also devastating in some regions. In Chinese internal politics, the coal industry is, unfortunately, a huge employer and a cheap source of fuel. Roughly 76% of China's energy comes from coal, making them the biggest CO2 emitter in the world. However, China is willing to negotiate, provided other countries are always also willing to make sacrifices. This leads us to China's international politics. First off, China has a strong desire to retain industry and seek to prevent it from being outcompeted, particularly by India and Africa, where wages are even more competitive. China also badly wants to continue exporting. The Chinese currency, the renminbi, is very strong. China increasingly seeks to have the reserve currency in whole or in part. Currently, the US has the reserve currency, but they may soon lose it. Strong manufacturing and trade are major factors in countries obtaining reserve currency status. As such, China usually refuses to sacrifice much growth for climate change policy. One recent example of negotiation was the Durban Conference in 2009. China tried to forge strong ties with India and the developing countries at the Durban Conference in order to produce a legally binding treaty. However, China's efforts were effectively blocked by India and the US. Well, that's it for me. Now my colleagues will talk more about Chinese climate change. 谢谢.
Thanks, Tom. Now we're going to hear from Dali, who's going to speak about the cultural perspective on China's climate change.
Thank you, Ruby. Hi, I'm Dali, and I'll be talking about the cultural perspective. To discuss the cultural perspective China has concerning climate change, one must first hold a clear understanding of the components that define culture. The description of culture is that it is a property of identified groups of people that share common understandings, rituals, social regulations, religion, and place. Thus, looking at China, it is apparent that climate change has impact on the cultural aspects in terms of the common understandings, places, and social regulations. China's common understandings of climate change has shifted throughout the years. In 2011, some of Chinese citizens did not even believe in the causes of climate change. For instance, there was a strong belief among Tibetans that the mountain deities had been angered, causing the climate to change. Thus, they completely disregarded scientific evidence that shows human activity is causing global warming. Despite religious beliefs in some part of China that cloud factually correct knowledge of climate change, currently, China has now recognized that it needs to reduce its reliance on coal and low energy efficiency. As China is a major contributor to climate change, China is also the most vulnerable to its effects. During the past 50 years, climate change has increased the frequency and intensity of extreme climate events throughout China. These climate events impact on its agriculture and livestock industry, forestry, natural ecological systems, water resources, and coastal zones. However, China's priority and its culture is around the air pollution within its cities, as a 2015 study calculated that the toxic air pollution in China contributes to the death of 1.6 million of its citizens. Seeing as climate change has a negative impact on China, China is now working towards educating its citizens. As of 2015, secondary and higher schools have been regulated to enhance its education on environmental protection and climate change. Overall, China's citizens' knowledge and engagement with climate change is improving. Its culture on climate change is also developing in the process, as China is now designing better cities, improving in new public transport, and improving energy efficiency. That is all for me. Back to you, Ruby.
Thank you, Dali. Now we're going to hear from Sandra, who will introduce the economic standpoint in which China lies.
Thanks, Ruby. My name is Sandra, and I'll be talking about the Chinese economy. Climate change in China affects the Chinese economy in various ways. China is a country that has undergone rapid growth in the last decades, which has had a profound impact on China's environment, health, politics, and culture. There has been many good aspects that emerge from China's economic expansion. However, the most negative and obvious impact of this rapid economic transformation has been on the environment, which includes serious pollution and health dangers to China's citizens. China has been the world's largest greenhouse emitter since 2006 and is also the world's largest source of carbon emissions. China's leaders have been implementing various technologies, limiting coal use and using more renewable energy such as solar and wind to combat it. To combat climate change in China, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology has set a goal to reduce coal consumption by 160 million tons by 2020, which can thus improve China's economy. China's environmental crisis has presented the country with challenges in its rapid industrialization process. Its economic rise, where the GDP grew 10% each year, has come at the expense of the nation's environment and public health. China has already spent approximately $2.7 billion to combat air pollution by closing or upgrading 2,000 polluting factories and replacing the use of coal with clean energy, which has seen the economy decrease, with its GDP going down by 6.5% annually, mainly by lost productivity since factories are being shut down rapidly. There is a direct correlation between economic growth and carbon emissions in China, including energy consumption per unit of GDP growth. The other is carbon dioxide emissions per unit of energy consumption. The carbon emissions of a country are therefore determined by its GDP, energy intensity, and carbon density. Changes of any of these factors will directly affect carbon emissions. Faster growth of energy efficiency and low carbon energy will open up a greater prospect for China's GDP growth in the future. In this sense, the carbon emission peak in 2030 will pose as a constraint on the speed and quality of China's economic development. China, as the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, must implement more stringent controls over greenhouse gas pollution to control climate change.
Thanks, Sandra. Now Luke will be informing us on the geographical perspective on China and their budding climate change.
Thanks, Ruby. My name's Luke and I'll be talking about the geographic position of climate change in China. China is located in the continent of Asia, covering 9,600,000 square kilometres of land and 27,000 square kilometres of water, making it the fourth largest in the world. This makes it rich with geographic diversity. In the western reaches of China, mountains, high plateaus and deserts dominate the landscape, whilst in the eastern and central areas, the land slopes into broad plains. Much like the United States, the impacts of global climate change in China are diverse due to its vast size and drastically different geographies. According to scientific research conducted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, China is estimated to have an annual average temperature rise of 3.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. The pattern of China's rising average temperatures parallels that of the global trend. While the global average surface temperature has seen increases by 0.3 to 0.6 degrees Celsius in the 19th century, the average surface temperature increase for the same time period in China was 0.5 to 0.8 degrees Celsius. Having a direct impact on China's coastal lines, global warming has accelerated the melting of the ice caps, in turn causing sea levels to rise. A report released by China's State Oceanic Administration indicated that the average sea level along the Chinese coastal line has increased by 99 millimeters over the past 30 years. Rapid urbanization along the Chinese coastal line has also aggravated the threats of rising sea levels. Tianjin and Shanghai show higher rates of sea level rise due to the high concentration of buildings and the over-extraction of groundwater, which has decreased land load carrying capacity. Being one of the most biodiverse countries, China is home to more than 17,000 different species of plants and animals. Rapid industrialization, over-urbanization, as well as mining and logging have led to the decline of habitats for these species. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has estimated that 34.74% of invertebrates and 35.92% of vertebrates in China are now endangered. In 2012, the Chinese State Council approved a development plan for energy saving and a cleaner automobile industry by 2020. The main objective is to speed up the development and rollout process of a more fuel-efficient car and form new energy sources. For manufacturers, China has set target fuel economy standards for new cars to 47 miles per gallon, whilst consumers were offered a reduction in vehicle tax paid on energy-saving vehicles by half and eliminating the tax completely on electric cars.
Hello, my name is Ruby, and I'm going to be speaking to you about the social aspects of China and their budding climate change. China has made a considerable effort in recent years to take full responsibility for their role in climate change. They firstly started by distinguishing the urgency and the science behind climate change, and that a lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing action. This was a good way to recognize the need for progress and urgent threat that climate change possesses. In 2015, the Paris Conference of Climate Change was held in France. China's leaders attended for the first time, indicating the necessity for a climate change response from them as a power. They showed constructive participation and agreed to implement the Paris Agreement that was signed at the conference. This Paris Agreement entails the participation in the design of future international systems to tackle climate change. To go along with this, China also put together a national assessment written by scientists to report on climate change and the changes they are making. They have implemented a 5-year socio-economic plan that has already reduced their emission unit GDP in comparison to 2010. Although China has a long way to go, the plans have been set in place to curb climate change and aim to undo the effects. China is currently following the European Union, Japan, and the United States to develop low-carbon sectors as a source of economic growth in a more climate-conscious manner. This will include focusing on developing low-carbon industries and effectively controlling its emissions in key industries such as power generation, steel, building materials, and the chemical industry. This was not the first time that China has teamed up with the United States to tackle climate change. Bans on the new coal power plants are now in place in 3 industrial regions: Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, Yangtze River Delta, and the Pearl River Delta. This will be a difficult feat for the fast-growing China, as their reliance on coal being existential and talks of the growth of the coal industry still circulating. Hi there, it's me, Ruby, and I'm just going to conclude today's presentation. It is easy to see and hear China's issues surrounding climate change. China has been the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter since 2006. However, their recent efforts in politics, economy, and socially in turn will help their nation culturally and geographically, and are to be seen as a stepping stone for a power that has grown exponentially over the last decade. Thank you.